So, you're about to create your very first character in Conquest of Azeroth. You've opened the class selection screen. You're looking through all the different options. And now you're asking yourself the same question that almost every new player asks. Which class should I play? It's probably the biggest decision you'll make when starting the game. Not because you're stuck with that class forever, but because your first class shapes your entire first impression of Conquest of Azeroth. Pick something that fits the way you enjoy playing, and you'll probably have a fantastic time. Pick something that doesn't, and you might spend your first 20 hours wondering why everyone else seems to be having more fun than you. The funny thing is, most new players go looking for one simple answer. They search YouTube, open 5 different tier lists, read a few Reddit posts, and somehow end up even more confused than when they started. One person says Necromancer is the best. Another swears Bloodmage is completely overpowered. Someone else says Pyromancer is mandatory. Then another player tells you to ignore all of them because Stormbringer is secretly the strongest. So, who's actually right? Honestly, all of them, and none of them. Because the biggest mistake you can make is choosing your first class based on somebody else's favorite. Here's something I wish someone had told me when I started playing MMORPGs. The best class isn't always the strongest one. It's the one that makes you excited to log in tomorrow. That sounds simple, but it's incredibly important. A class that's 5% stronger on paper doesn't matter if you get bored after 3 days. Meanwhile, a class you genuinely enjoy, you'll naturally get better at it. You'll learn the rotation. You'll understand the talents. You'll improve without even realizing it. And before long, you'll probably outperform someone who picked the so-called meta class but never really connected with it. So instead of ranking classes today, we're going to do something much more useful. We're going to figure out which type of class actually fits the kind of player you are. By the end of this video, you should have a much clearer idea of where to start. Let's jump in. First, forget the meta. Before we even talk about specific classes, we need to get one thing out of the way. Stop chasing the meta. Seriously, I know that's probably the opposite of what you expected me to say, but hear me out. Every MMORPG has a meta. Every update changes something. One class gets buffed, another gets nerfed, a new build appears, some interaction gets discovered, the rankings change. Then, a few weeks later, they change again. If you're constantly choosing classes based on whatever happens to be strongest this month, you're probably going to spend more time re-rolling than actually playing. I've seen players level 3 or 4 different characters, not because they disliked them, but because they kept hearing another class was slightly stronger. Meanwhile, the player who stuck with one class learned every cooldown, every combo, every trick. Guess who usually performs better? Exactly. Experience almost always beats small balance differences. That's why I think your first class should be chosen based on your personality, not the latest tier list. What kind of player are you? Here's a question that almost nobody asks. What do you actually enjoy doing in games? Not what's strongest, not what's fastest. What do you enjoy? Think about the games you've played before. Do you like standing back and controlling the fight from a distance? Do you enjoy jumping into the middle of combat? Do you like helping your teammates? Or do you just want to watch huge numbers appear on your screen? Those answers matter far more than people realize. For example, some players absolutely love managing summons, watching an army fight beside them, planning ahead, controlling the battlefield. If that sounds fun to you, there's a pretty good chance you'll enjoy a class like Necromancer. Other players want constant action. They don't want to stand still. They like quick decisions, fast movement, always pressing something. Those players usually end up enjoying faster-paced classes. Then you have players who love seeing enormous burst damage. They don't mind waiting for the perfect moment, as long as the payoff feels incredible. Again, completely different playstyle. None of these are better. They're just different. And that's exactly why copying somebody else's recommendation doesn't always work. Don't worry about making the wrong choice. Here's another thing that stresses new players way more than it should. They're terrified of choosing the wrong class. What if I don't like it? What if I waste my time? What if another class turns out to be better? Honestly, those are normal concerns. But here's the good news. Choosing your first class isn't some irreversible life decision. You're not signing a contract. You're starting an adventure. Sometimes you'll pick a class, play it for 20 hours, and realize, you know what? This isn't really for me. That's okay. In fact, I'd argue that's valuable, because now you know what you don't enjoy. That makes choosing your next class much easier. Every experienced MMO player has a story like that. Almost nobody finds their forever main on the very first try. Now that we've talked about mindset, let's get into something much more practical. Instead of asking, what's the strongest class? Let's answer a much better question. Which class fits the way you actually like to play? If you like playing solo, let's start with the players who spend most of their time alone. Maybe you don't always have a group to play with. Maybe your friends log in at different times. Or maybe you just enjoy doing things at your own pace. If that's you, then your first class should make solo content feel comfortable. You don't want to be constantly stopping to recover. You don't want every elite enemy to feel like a boss fight. And you definitely don't want simple quests taking twice as long as they should. This is why classes with strong self-sustain or reliable damage tend to feel much better for newer players. You're able to make mistakes, recover quickly, keep moving. Instead of constantly asking yourself, can I survive this? You're thinking, how many enemies can I pull before this gets interesting? That's a much more enjoyable experience, especially when you're still learning the game. If you love big damage numbers. Now, maybe you're a completely different type of player. Maybe the reason you play MMORPGs is simple. You want damage, huge numbers, big critical hits, watching enemies disappear before they even have a chance to fight back. Honestly, I get it. It's satisfying. There's something incredibly fun about watching your screen fill with damage numbers. If that's what keeps you playing, then you'll probably enjoy classes built around explosive burst damage. Just remember, burst usually comes with responsibility. Timing matters. Cooldowns matter. Knowing when to commit matters. The players who master these builds don't just press every button the moment it's available. They understand when the fight is about to change, when enemies are grouped together, when the perfect opportunity appears. That's what separates average players from great ones. If you enjoy helping other players, not everyone wants to top the damage meter. Some players genuinely enjoy supporting the group, keeping everyone alive, protecting teammates, making difficult encounters feel much easier. If that's your personality, don't ignore tanks and healers just because everyone else is talking about DPS. Here's something I've noticed over the years. Great tanks and great healers are always remembered. People add them to their friends list. Invite them back. Want them in future groups, because they're incredibly valuable. If you enjoy leading groups, making decisions, or helping everyone succeed together, those roles can be incredibly rewarding. They're also some of the fastest ways to learn dungeon mechanics, because you're constantly paying attention to what's happening around you. Don't choose a class just because it's popular. This is probably one of the biggest traps for new players. You open YouTube, every thumbnail says, most OP build, broken class, best build right now. And suddenly, thousands of players start creating the exact same character. Here's the problem. Popularity doesn't automatically mean you'll enjoy playing it. I've recommended classes to friends before. Some absolutely love them. Others quit after 2 days because the playstyle just didn't click. Neither of them was wrong. They simply enjoyed different things. That's why I always encourage people to ask one question before creating a character. Does this class actually look fun? If the answer is yes, you're probably making the right choice. Every class feels better with experience. Here's something that doesn't get mentioned enough. Almost every class feels a little awkward at first. You're still learning the abilities. You're reading talents. You're figuring out your keybinds. Everything feels slower than it should. That's normal. Don't judge a class after the first 30 minutes. Give yourself time to understand it. Some of the most rewarding classes in Conquest of Azeroth have a learning curve. Once everything starts clicking, the class feels completely different. I've seen players almost re-roll, only to fall in love with their class a few days later because they finally understood how everything worked together. Patience really does pay off. The biggest mistake I see new players make. If I had to pick one mistake, just one, it would be this. Players spend so much time trying to avoid making the wrong choice that they never actually start playing. They watch guide after guide, compare every class, read forum posts, look at spreadsheets, ask 10 different people for advice. And after all of that, they're somehow even less certain than when they began. Meanwhile, the player who simply picked a class that looked interesting is already 20 levels ahead, learning the game and having fun. Information is useful, but eventually, you have to stop researching and start playing. So now we've talked about choosing a class that fits your personality instead of blindly following the meta. But before you click that Create Character button, there's one final piece of advice I think every new player should hear. And honestly, it might be the most important part of this entire video. Your first character doesn't need to be perfect. Alright, before we finish this guide, I want you to forget one idea. The idea that your first character has to be perfect. Because honestly, it doesn't. Think back to the first MMORPG you ever played. Was your first character your main forever? Probably not. Mine wasn't. And I know plenty of experienced players who have switched mains several times over the years. Not because their old class became bad, but because their preferences changed. Maybe they discovered they enjoyed healing. Maybe they realized they preferred melee over ranged. Or maybe they simply wanted a different challenge. That's completely normal. The important thing isn't choosing the perfect class. It's choosing one that gets you excited to start playing. Because once you're having fun, everything else becomes easier. You'll naturally want to learn your rotation. You'll look up guides. You'll improve your gear. You'll start understanding mechanics. That progress happens because you're enjoying yourself, not because somebody told you that your class was number one on a tier list. The meta will always change. Here's something every MMO player eventually learns. The meta never stays the same. One update comes out. A class gets buffed. Another gets nerfed. Someone discovers a new build. A new strategy becomes popular. Suddenly, the rankings change again. If you spend your entire time chasing whatever happens to be strongest, you'll never stop switching characters. And honestly, that's exhausting. Meanwhile, the player who's been playing the same class for months knows every little detail. They know exactly when to use cooldowns. They know every talent interaction. They know every trick that doesn't show up in a tier list. That's why you'll often see someone playing an A-tier class outperform someone using the current S-tier build. Skill has always mattered, and I think it always will. So don't stress too much about today's rankings. Find something you enjoy. Learn it well. The results will come naturally. My advice if I were starting today: if I logged into Conquest of Azeroth today, with absolutely nothing, no gold, no gear, no friends helping me, how would I choose my first class? Honestly, I'd ask myself 3 questions. First, what kind of combat do I actually enjoy? Do I like staying at range? Being in melee? Managing pets? Supporting a group? That answer immediately removes half the options. Second, will I mostly play solo or with other people? Because that changes everything. A player who spends 90% of their time alone usually wants something very different from someone who's always running dungeons with friends. And finally, will I still enjoy this class after 50 hours? Not 5 hours. 50. Because that's when your real main starts to reveal itself. When the excitement of creating a character wears off. What's left is the gameplay itself. That's what matters most. Don't be afraid to change later. Here's one last thing before we wrap up. Let's say you create a necromancer. You play for a while, and eventually you realize, I actually think I'd enjoy blood mage more. That's not a failure. That's progress. You learn something about the kind of player you are. Every character teaches you something, even the ones that don't become your main. Some classes teach positioning. Others teach cooldown management. Some improve your awareness. Others teach resource management. No time spent learning is truly wasted, even if you eventually move on to something else. Final thoughts. So, before you create your first character, remember this. Don't choose a class because someone else told you it's overpowered. Don't choose it because it's number one on a tier list. And definitely don't choose it because you're worried about what might happen in the next balance patch. Choose the class that makes you think, I can't wait to play this. Because that's the class you're most likely to stick with. That's the class you'll naturally improve on. And that's the class you'll probably remember long after you've replaced every piece of gear. Conquest of Azeroth has a huge variety of classes and playstyles. There isn't one perfect answer. There are simply different answers for different players. And that's one of the things that makes the game so much fun. So hopefully this video made choosing your first class a little easier. Remember, there isn't one correct answer. The best class is the one that fits your playstyle and keeps you excited to log in every day. If this guide helped you out, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel. And subscribe if you want more Conquest of Azeroth content. I've got beginner guides, class breakdowns, build guides, leveling tips, profession guides, gold farming routes, mythic dungeon strategies, and plenty more videos on the way. And now I want to hear from you. What was your very first class in Conquest of Azeroth? And if you could start all over again, would you pick the same one? Leave your answer in the comments. I always enjoy reading your experiences and recommendations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Conquest of Azeroth guide.